mosque, temple, or other house of religious worship, religion, religious denomination, or an association of the foregoing, and any bona fide private or fraternal organization to engage in any conduct or activity that is prohibited by its religious beliefs or its tenets of faith, nor shall any such church, synagogue, mosque, temple, or other house of religious worship, religion, religious denomination, or an association of the foregoing, and any bona fide private or fraternal organization be required to engage in any conduct or activity that would violate its religious beliefs or tenets as a condition of entering into any contract with any agency of this city.
Please call the roll on the motion.
Mrs. Blinsky. Aye. Mr. DiGiacinto.
Aye.
Ms. Dolan.
Nay.
Mr. Evans.
Aye.
Mr. Mauer.
Aye.
Mr. Reynolds.
Nay.
Mr. Donchett.
Aye. Discussion on 16. Mr. Evans, comments?
Yes, thank you, President Sanchez. This is the existing exemption. It's wordy because it's repetitive. What has been added or changed? There were concerns outside of the religion of Christianity that should also be included. I believe it was a memo from Ms. Dolan that others outside that realm should also be included. So the wording is to attempt to do that, adding synagogue, mosque, temple, other house of religious worship, as well as protection for fraternal organizations, also mentioned by Ms. Dolan in the same memo about possible, I don't have the memo in front of me, the fraternal organizations you referenced in the memo. So yes, exactly, those examples. So that's what is in there. It's just, and it's repeated 4 times just to follow the wording of the original document.
Comments? Mr. Reynolds?
What was the origin of this language? Where did you just decided to add the synagogue, mosque, temple, or other house of religious worship, religion part?
Mm-hmm.
Would I be allowed to ask Mr. Glassman a question?
Chair will recognize that, yes.
Mr. Glassman, can you speak to this particular amendment and how it relates to other similar other commissions throughout the state?
It's unique. I mean, this doesn't exist anywhere else. And I think it's confusing. And I would like to know the origin of the language, who proposed the language to the council person, because it does not seem to reflect what's in the State Human Relations Act as the religious exemption that the next amendment, I think, is attempting to reflect, and the two seem to be potentially in conflict with one another. Religion includes every single denomination or non-believers as well. You don't have to list mosque, synagogue, temple, etc., because it's all covered under religion. And I think that this makes it much more confusing than it needs to be. It's almost impossible to read this and fully understand it, especially when you're seeing it for the first time. But this is unique. It doesn't exist in any other ordinance in the state.
Thanks, Mr. Downing.
I guess my response to that would be the following. It may be unique. That may be something that Bethlehem and your legislative judgment chooses to do or not to do. And I would disagree that the language is relatively clear. In fact, it's very clear. There's no other way to read it. And it tracks it through this amendment as proposed by Mr. Evans.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, any comment?
No.
Ms. Dolan, go ahead.
It is clear. It is clear, and it's clearly wrong. And I'll tell you that I think I know the origin of this language. And I think that the origin of I'm talking about the original language that now, someone has deemed kindly enough to include other religions besides Christianity. Thank you very much, but it's still, it comes from the Catholic Church. That's where this language comes from, and that's why it doesn't reference any other. In the original language that we got, that the administration received from somewhere, is clearly it comes from an entity that doesn't seem to recognize that there's any other religion besides churches, and then everybody who's not in a church is a denomination. So I brought up that, for example, Judaism doesn't have churches, but it's not. Judaism is a religion; it's not a denomination. So they fix that. And this does fix that, but it doesn't fix the real problem, which is that this isn't even reflecting what we're trying to do. Let me just explain. I've given this a lot of thought. And a religious exemption or exception means that we are weakening, in some ways, our own human relations ordinance. And we're playing with fire. This is key to the ordinance, and I would rather just not have an exemption and make our religious community deal with its issues of discrimination. And I would like to have an ordinance that makes it possible for just kind of ridiculous things to start occurring. So I think we'd be going in a very dangerous direction to accept amended language that came from the Catholic Church as our as part of our public ordinance.
Any other comments? Mr. Evans, then we'll go to Mr. Maurer.
Yes, I think it was language that came from Jay Leeson, and he did talk to me about it. And I think some of his logic is that over 50% of this community is Roman Catholic, and that they should have an input. And I think that was the logic as I view it. Just an awareness comment.
Mr. Rouse?
Just to add on to that, and I know that oftentimes one of the common themes that we have in this room is the idea of openness and open and accountable government, and Councilman Dolan have been looking for before. In the last page, number 8, which says, in response to some comments about whether the current language of the exemption could be made clearer to make it clear that it applies to not only churches but also mosques, synagogues, temples, and other religious institutions, the third and fourth lines of the current language that read, quote, church, religious denomination, or association of churches, could be modified to read, quote, church, synagogue, mosque, temple, or other house of religious worship, religion, religious denomination, or an association of any of the foregoing, which is the exact language that is here. And once again, if that's a decision that we decide to make, that's fine. But at the same time, I do think we need to understand that where this language came from, who it came from, and what the interests are behind it. And once again, if that's a decision that we want to make, that's fine. But I think that we need to be open and honest about the fact that, as Councilman Dolan had said, and as Mr. Maurer had said, there is an interest here. As with most things in government, there's an interest. At the same time, this exact language came from, as Councilman Dolan said, a former councilman that has an interest here. And once again, that's fine if that's something we want to approve, but the record deserves to show that that's where this came from, and that's whose interests he is representing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoller.
And to further clarify, Councilman Leeson, when he was on this dais on several occasions, recused himself from voting because he, in fact, works for the Diocese of Allentown. So the interest is even more clear because he's representing a denomination that at 50% is the largest denomination, and that's exactly why we have these ordinances, so that our community is not led by the nose by the majority. That's why we're here. So, if we're going to take language from the Catholic Church, and then we're going to justify it by saying that, well, we're going to do that because we want to make sure that we're looking out for the interests of the majority. That's just silly. What we're doing in an exception is we're looking out for the exemption, looking out for the interests of all religions, not the majority religion, all religions. And I think that's what we want here in Bethlehem. So I think that the spirit of Bethlehem is in the original language, and the spirit of looking out for the Catholics in the community is equally served by protecting all religions.
Is there a motion to approve the ordinance at Article 145 as amended? So moved. Mr. DiGiacinto moves. Second. Is there a second to approve the ordinance as amended? Is there a second to approve this whole ordinance as amended?
I'll second.
A second. Discussion? Ms. Dolan?
Passage of the ordinance as amended means that we are passing an ordinance with language that says only churches and religious denominations are exempt. So mosques and synagogues, Jewish people, they're not exempt. So if we vote aye on this, you know, only churches, only religious denominations or associations of churches, that's what we would be voting for. We would be voting for the Catholic 50% majority rules. I'm just astounded. I think we've done some really great work. We've worked really hard on this, and then something comes in at the last minute from a former councilman, and we're going to accept language that comes from someone who works for the Catholic Church. I'm Jewish. I'm personally offended. So I want to say that. I also want to say that, and I'll go on and I'll just say to my fellow council people, is this really how you feel? You really don't think that Judaism or Islam, only churches, and we should have this great big, you know, exemption for them, way bigger than is necessary. I was not psychologically harmed. In fact, as a woman, I find it difficult to take when straight people try to create boogeymen and boogie women out of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. When the fact, statistically, overwhelmingly is that community members most likely to rape, accost, abuse, degrade, discriminate, and murder women are straight males. That doesn't mean I don't love straight males. You know, one last appeal to reason from members of this council. Please don't do this. Please don't vote yes. I won't be able to vote for this. I don't want a Human Relations Commission that allows exemptions only to Christians.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Reynolds?
Just quickly, I will be voting to support this tonight. However, I share many of Councilman Nolan's reservations.